Medusa was not born a monster. She was made one by a god's crime and another god's punishment. This is the brutal truth behind the myth, where victimhood was rewritten as monstrosity and survival became a curse. Medusa was not always a name whispered with fear. Before serpents coiled where hair should be, before her gaze became a death sentence, before poets flattened her into a cautionary symbol, she was a young woman whose life unfolded quietly under the shadow of the gods. This is where the story must begin, not with blood or stone or heroes, but with a girl whose greatest crime was existing within reach of divine power. To understand what was taken from her, the myth must be stripped of its spectacle and return to its beginning, where Medusa was human, vulnerable, and alive in a world that did not protect women from gods. In the earliest strands of Greek tradition, Medusa stands apart from the image most people recognize. She was not born a monster. She was not one of the ancient horrors that crawled out of chaos at the dawn of time. That distinction belonged to her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, daughters of the primordial sea deities, Phorcys and Ceto. They were immortal, ancient, and already feared. Medusa was different. She was mortal. She aged. She could bleed. She could die. That single distinction is the first quiet injustice of her story, because it meant she alone could suffer consequences. Immortality is protection. Mortality is exposure. Medusa lived in a world governed by hierarchy, of gods above mortals, men above women, power above truth. Beauty in this world was not a gift, it was a liability. And Medusa, by every surviving account, was beautiful enough to attract attention she did not ask for and could not refuse. Ancient writers linger on this point with uncomfortable fascination, describing her hair as radiant, her presence striking, her youth unmissable. These details are not neutral. In Greek myth, beauty is rarely allowed to exist without punishment. It draws envy, desire, and ultimately, violence. Medusa's beauty did not elevate her, it marked her. She served as a priestess in the temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom, war, and rigid order. This role is critical because it came with a vow of chastity. Priestesses were expected to embody purity not as a personal choice but as a public symbol. Their bodies were no longer fully their own. They belonged to the god they served. Medusa's life, therefore, was already constrained. She lived under rules she did not create, in service to a goddess who valued control above compassion. The temple was meant to be a place of safety. In reality, it was only sacred as long as no god decided otherwise. Athena herself represents a contradiction that haunts this story. She is often praised as a protector of women, a goddess born without a mother, aligned with intellect rather than desire. But Athena is also the embodiment of patriarchal order. She sides with fathers over mothers, law over empathy, structure over suffering. She protects women who conform. Those who do not, or who are forced out of conformity, are expendable. Medusa did not fail Athena by choice. She failed by circumstance. The ancient world did not recognize consent as a moral boundary for gods. When a god desired a mortal, that desire functioned as fate. Resistance was meaningless. Survival was reframed as participation. This is the world Medusa lived in, a world where divine violence was normalized and mortal pain was background noise. When Poseidon, god of the sea, turned his attention toward her, the outcome was never in doubt. The only uncertainty was where it would happen and who would pay the price afterward. Poseidon was not a subtle god. He was earthquakes and storms, salt and pressure, force without restraint. When he violated Medusa within Athena's temple, the crime was layered. It was an assault on Medusa's body, a desecration of Athena's sacred space, and a display of dominance by one god over another's domain. But power does not punish itself. Poseidon would walk away untouched, his reputation intact, his authority unquestioned. The consequences would fall where they always did, downward. Medusa survived the assault. That survival is rarely framed as such in the myth, but it matters. She lived through something that should have destroyed her, and in doing so she became a problem. A living reminder of violence is inconvenient to systems that depend on silence. The temple could not remain pure with her inside it. The goddess could not remain unchallenged with evidence of desecration standing in her sanctuary. Someone had to be blamed. Medusa was the only option. Athena's response was not justice. It was containment. It was punishment disguised as order. Medusa was transformed, not as retribution for a crime she committed, but as a means of erasing the discomfort her existence caused. Her beauty, the very thing that drew divine violence, was turned against her. Her hair became snakes, symbols of danger and revulsion. Her gaze, once a point of attraction, became lethal. To look at her was to die. The world would no longer see a woman. It would see a warning. This transformation is often described as a curse, but curses imply wrongdoing. Medusa did nothing wrong. What Athena inflicted was not moral correction, but social exile made permanent. Medusa was stripped of her humanity and recast as a monster so the narrative could continue without acknowledging the crime that necessitated her suffering. Monsters do not require sympathy. Victims do. By turning Medusa into the former, the gods absolved themselves of confronting the latter. Exile followed transformation. Medusa was driven to the edges of the world, to barren lands where no community existed, where isolation finished what violence began. As she did not hunt, she did not conquer, she hid. Every death attributed to her gaze is framed as aggression, but it is more accurately understood as forced self-defense. When survival itself becomes lethal, the blame shifts unfairly onto the survivor. Medusa did not seek to turn men to stone. Men sought her, drawn by stories, by bravado, by the same entitlement that had always placed her in danger. The myth begins to rot here, reshaped by generations who preferred a monster to a mirror. Medusa's image was severed from her story. Her face was placed on shields, carved into temples, used as a symbol of protection by the very culture that destroyed her. The Gorgonion, her severed head, became a ward against evil. This is not irony, it is erasure. Her pain was aestheticized, her suffering was repurposed, her voice was removed entirely. By the time heroes enter the narrative, Medusa has already lost everything: her autonomy, her identity, her place among humans. She exists only as an obstacle. Perseus will arrive later, celebrated not for understanding her, but for killing her efficiently. The myth will call this heroism. History will repeat it. Victims will continue to be reframed as threats, punished for surviving what should never have happened to them. But at this stage of the story, Perseus has not yet lifted his sword. Medusa still lives, breathing in exile, carrying a body reshaped by cruelty she did not deserve. She is alone with the consequences of divine indifference, trapped in a form designed to ensure she will never be touched again, never be approached without violence, never be mistaken for human. This is not the story of a monster's birth. It is the story of how systems protect themselves by destroying the vulnerable. Medusa's tragedy did not begin when snakes replaced her hair. It began when the world decided that a victim was easier to punish than a god. Transformation myths often pretend to explain themselves. They dress cruelty in symbolism and call it meaning. Medusa's transformation is no exception. What happened to her is usually presented as an instant, a flash of divine will, a neat moment where a goddess acts and a monster emerges fully formed. That version is comfortable. It allows distance. The truth is slower, uglier, and far more revealing about the gods who authored it. Medusa did not become a monster in a single heartbeat. She was broken into one. After the assault in Athena's temple, Medusa did not immediately flee into legend. Oh, there is a silence in the sources here, a gap that speaks louder than detail. Ancient writers were uninterested in the aftermath of violation when it concerned a woman. They did not record her fear, her shame, her confusion, or her attempts to understand what had happened to her body and her life. That absence is not accidental. It reflects a world where the suffering of women was not considered history, it was considered noise. Athena's intervention is often framed as righteous fury, but fury directed at whom matters. The temple had been defiled, and defilement demanded response. Yet the god who committed the act, Poseidon, was untouchable. He was one of the Olympian elite, a brother of Zeus, a force of nature. Athena could not punish him without destabilizing the divine order itself. And so she turned to the only figure she could control. Medusa was not judged, she was processed. The curse did not come with a trial. There was no inquiry, no weighing of responsibility. Athena did not ask whether Medusa had consented, because the answer would have been inconvenient. Instead, the goddess imposed meaning onto Medusa's body. Meaning is power when wielded by those who already have it. Athena decided that Medusa's beauty was the problem, that it had tempted a god and defiled a sanctuary. In doing so, she rewrote cause and effect. Violence was recast as provocation. Survival became guilt. The physical transformation was only the most visible layer of punishment. Snakes replaced hair not merely to horrify, but to signal danger. In Greek symbolism, serpents are ancient, chthonic, associated with death and taboo. They crawl where humans do not belong. By crowning Medusa with them, Athena marked her as something that should not be approached. The gaze that turned men to stone completed the isolation. To look at Medusa was to die. To meet her eyes was to be erased. The curse ensured she would never again be seen as a person. She could not be touched, spoken to, or understood. Every attempt at connection would end in catastrophe. This is where the myth commits its greatest deception. The lethal gaze is framed as a weapon, as though Medusa gained power in exchange for her suffering. But power that guarantees loneliness is not power at all. It is containment. Athena did not arm Medusa so she could defend herself. She altered her so the world would keep its distance. The curse solved a social problem by removing Medusa from society altogether. Exile followed naturally. Medusa was driven to the edges of the known world, often described as a desolate land beyond Oceanus, a place of stone and silence. This was not a punishment of death, but something arguably worse, indefinite survival in isolation. The gods understood the cruelty of this. Immortality was reserved for her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who would endure forever as monsters. Medusa alone remained mortal, aging within a body designed to repel all life. She would die eventually, but only after years of solitude that stripped meaning from time itself. In this wasteland, Medusa became a story before she became a person again. Travelers whispered about her. Kings warned their sons. Poets sharpened their metaphors. The details of her life disappeared beneath exaggeration. She was described as snarling, savage, eager to kill. No one asked why she lived where no one else would, why every encounter ended in death. No one considered the possibility that the petrified figures littering her domain were not trophies, but accidents, intrusions, consequences of a curse that made coexistence impossible. Fear filled the silence left by ignorance. Men armed themselves and sought her out, driven by glory, greed, or the thrill of confronting something forbidden. They came to test themselves against the monster. Each one died the same way, frozen mid-motion, expressions of shock preserved in stone. Over time, the landscape itself became a gallery of interrupted intentions. Medusa lived among them, surrounded by reminders that the world would only ever approach her with violence. It is here that the myth often pauses, content to let Medusa exist as a static horror until a hero arrives. But this period matters. It is the long middle of her life, where survival became endurance and identity dissolved under repetition. Medusa did not wake each day with rage. Rage requires hope. What she carried was something colder, resignation, the understanding that her story had already been decided by beings who would never face consequences for what they had done. The gods, meanwhile, benefited from this arrangement. Athena's temple could be restored, its defilement symbolically erased. Poseidon's reputation remained intact. The cosmic hierarchy held. Order was preserved. Medusa's suffering functioned as a moral plug, sealing a crack in the narrative of divine justice. Her transformation was not about her, it was about stabilizing a system, and yet, the curse had unintended consequences. By turning Medusa into a living weapon, the gods created a symbol more powerful than they anticipated. The Gorgon became an object of fascination. Her image appeared on armor and doorways, used as an apotropaic charm to ward off evil. The irony is sharp enough to cut. Medusa, punished for being violated, became a tool to protect others from harm. Her face was invoked to repel danger, even as no one questioned the danger she herself had endured. This symbolic appropriation stripped Medusa further. Her image was severed from her experience, flattened into a motif. She became useful without being understood. This is how cultures often handle uncomfortable truths. They aestheticize them. They turn pain into pattern. By the time Perseus enters the story, Medusa is no longer a woman in exile. She is an icon waiting to be harvested. Perseus does not come alone. He arrives backed by the full machinery of Olympus. Athena herself guides him. Hermes equips him. The gods who destroyed Medusa now sponsor her execution. This is not coincidence. It is cleanup. Perseus is tasked with killing Medusa not because she threatens the world, but because her continued existence complicates the myth the gods prefer to tell about themselves. The tools Perseus receives reveal everything about the nature of Medusa's power. He is given a polished shield, instructed to use it as a mirror so he does not have to look at her directly. This is more than a tactic. It is metaphor. Medusa cannot be confronted face to face. Her story cannot be acknowledged directly. She must be approached indirectly, reflected, distorted, kept at a safe remove. The hero is taught to avoid her gaze, to kill her without truly seeing her. When Perseus reaches Medusa, she is asleep. This detail is often glossed over, but it is damning. The monster is not rampaging. She is not attacking. She is resting, vulnerable, unaware. Perseus does not face her in battle. He beheads her in her sleep. The act is clean, efficient, celebrated. Heroism in this myth does not require courage. It requires obedience. Medusa dies without ever being asked her story. Her head is severed, but her usefulness does not end. From her blood spring Pegasus and Chrysa, offspring of Poseidon, born only after her death. Even in dying, Medusa is made productive. Her body continues to serve the narratives of gods and heroes. Her head, still deadly, is handed to Athena, who mounts it on her shield. The goddess wears the face of the woman she destroyed as a symbol of her own power. This is the final cruelty of Medusa's transformation. She is not allowed rest. Her image is immortalized, weaponized, and displayed. Athena carries the Gorgon's gaze into battle, using it to terrify enemies. The curse that isolated Medusa becomes an asset once removed from her body. Once stripped of her humanity completely, Medusa is finally acceptable. The myth closes ranks around this ending, insisting that order has been restored. The monster is dead, the hero is rewarded, the gods remain supreme. But beneath that tidy conclusion lies a truth the story cannot fully bury. Medusa was not defeated because she was evil, she was eliminated because she was inconvenient. Her existence exposed the moral vacancy at the heart of divine justice. The birth of the monster was not the moment Athena cursed Medusa. It was the moment the world decided to believe that curse was deserved. That decision echoes far beyond Greek myth. It is repeated whenever victims are blamed, whenever survival is reframed as provocation, whenever systems protect themselves by sacrificing the vulnerable. Medusa's story does not end with her death. It fractures. It seeps into art, language, and memory, reshaped to serve different agendas. In the final part of this story, the focus shifts to what happens after the hero leaves, to how Medusa is remembered, distorted, and reclaimed. Because the most unsettling truth about Medusa is not how she died, but how long it took for anyone to question why she was punished in the first place. Heroes are not defined by what they destroy, but by what the story chooses to forgive them for destroying. Perseus has been remembered for millennia as a flawless champion, a young man favored by the gods, brave enough to face a monster no one else would. That version of events is clean. It is also incomplete, because if heroism requires context, then Perseus's greatest act was not courage, but compliance. He did exactly what the gods asked of him, and history rewarded him for it. When Perseus arrived at the edge of the world where Medusa lived, he did not encounter a beast raging against civilization. He encountered silence. Stone figures littered the landscape, men frozen mid-step, weapons still raised, expressions caught between confidence and terror. This is usually framed as evidence of Medusa's savagery, but stone does not scream, it does not chase, it does not threaten. The environment Perseus entered was not a battlefield. It was a graveyard created by intrusion. Every statue was proof that men kept coming to her, not that she went to them. Medusa herself was asleep. This detail matters more than almost any other, because it collapses the heroic illusion entirely. She was not alert. She was not attacking. She was not even aware. Sleep is the most vulnerable state a human being can enter. By killing her then, Perseus did not overcome a threat. He executed a sentence already decided by gods who refused to dirty their own hands. The blade fell not because Medusa was dangerous in that moment, but because she was defenseless. The severing of her head is often described with clinical detachment, as though it were a technical challenge successfully completed. But decapitation is intimate violence. It requires proximity. Perseus stood close enough to hear her breathing, close enough to feel the heat of her body. He did not look at her face, relying instead on the reflection in Athena's shield. Even in death, Medusa was denied eye contact. She was not permitted to be seen directly. The story insists on this distance because closeness would invite empathy, and empathy would fracture the narrative. When Medusa died, the myth did something strange. From her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysa, a warrior. Creation erupted from destruction. This is often framed as poetic justice or divine mystery. In truth, it is exploitation taken to its final extreme. Medusa's body, violated in life, was harvested in death. Even her blood served a purpose that had nothing to do with her. She was reduced entirely to a vessel for outcomes that benefited others. Her head, however, remained powerful. Perseus carried it with him, using it as a weapon against enemies who had nothing to do with Medusa's suffering. Kings, monsters, rivals, all were turned to stone by the same gaze that had ruined her life. The curse followed the hero, not the victim, and yet Perseus was never condemned for wielding it. Violence becomes acceptable when the right person controls it. Medusa's power was only considered monstrous when it belonged to her. Eventually, Perseus handed the head to Athena. This exchange is perhaps the most revealing moment in the entire myth. Athena, the goddess who punished Medusa for being violated, now claimed her remains as a trophy. She mounted the Gorgon's face onto her aegis, her shield, and carried it into battle as a symbol of terror and authority. The face of a victim became the emblem of divine justice. The goddess did not hide what she had done, she displayed it. From that point on, Medusa no longer existed as a character. She existed as an image. The Gorgon's head appeared on temples, coins, shields, and doorways. It was believed to ward off evil, to repel danger, to protect the innocent. This belief exposes a cultural contradiction too sharp to ignore. Medusa, condemned as a monster, became a universal protector. The thing people feared most was also the thing they trusted to keep them safe. Her image guarded children, homes, and cities. No one questioned why a so-called monster was so effective at protection. The answer is uncomfortable. Medusa was never aligned with evil. She was aligned with boundary. Her gaze punished intrusion. It stopped violence by ending it. The power that isolated her was the same power that made others feel safe once it was removed from her control. This is how societies often treat survivors of trauma. They are feared when autonomous, valued only when their pain can be repurposed. Over time, storytellers flattened Medusa further. She became shorthand for danger, for female rage, for punishment. Artists exaggerated her features, twisting her face into a snarl, sharpening her monstrosity. The more distance culture put between her and her origin, the easier it became to forget that she was once a girl in a temple who trusted the gods. Mythology did not merely erase her humanity, it replaced it with a warning label. And yet Medusa never fully disappeared. She lingered in the margins, in the contradictions. Philosophers questioned the morality of the gods. Poets hinted at injustice. Centuries later, when societies began to re-examine power, consent, and punishment, Medusa's story resurfaced with new clarity. She was no longer just a monster to be slain. She was evidence. Proof that myths were written by the powerful and that their victims were buried beneath symbolism. Modern reinterpretations did not invent Medusa's victimhood. They uncovered it. The clues were always there: her mortality, her exile, her silence, her death in sleep. What changed was the willingness to ask the right questions. Why was she punished instead of Poseidon? Why was her transformation framed as justice? Why was her power feared only while it belonged to her? These questions destabilized the myth, and that instability is precisely why they were avoided for so long. Medusa's afterlife is not just about how she was remembered, but how she was used. Her face became a tool to scare enemies, a decoration stripped of context. Even today, her image circulates widely, often divorced from her story. She is used to symbolize female anger, danger, or empowerment, sometimes without acknowledging the violence that created her. This ambiguity is part of her legacy. Medusa resists containment even now. She refuses to mean only one thing. What remains undeniable is this: Medusa never chose the role she was given. She did not seek power, terror, or legend. She sought safety. When safety was denied, she survived, and survival was treated as transgression. The gods did not destroy her because she was dangerous. They destroyed her because she exposed the fragility of their justice. In the end, Sir Perseus lived a celebrated life. Athena retained her authority. Poseidon faced no consequences. The system held. Medusa alone paid the full price. But history has a way of reopening closed cases. Every generation that revisits her story chips away at the myth's armor, revealing the human cost beneath. Medusa's gaze still turns things to stone, but not in the way the myth intended. It freezes comfortable lies. It forces confrontation. To look at Medusa now is to see how easily victimhood can be rewritten as monstrosity, how quickly power can absolve itself, and how often survival is punished instead of protected. She was not the monster. She was the proof.